Well, hello, this is Pastor Jeff Short with Christian Answers, and I just wanted to do another video on the follow-up of the Willow Creek Association's independent advisory group, their final report in which they reported their conclusion was that Pastor Bill Hybels had credible accusations against him. And from the beginning, I just want to say that I don't know whether Bill Hybels is guilty of these accusations. I don't know if he's innocent of these accusations, but my point during the whole episode, as soon as I began to hear of these accusations coming out at Willow Creek about a year ago, my whole point is that you have to have due process. You have to let Bill Hybels defend himself, and you have to let his side question the witnesses, and you have to have cross-examination, and you have to have evidence, and you have to have a process, a fair process that's fair to the women accusing him and also fair to Bill Hybels, who is the accused. And one of the major criticisms I have about the whole Willow Creek situation and the investigation is that it doesn't follow due process. And so what we see in the report that was just submitted a few weeks ago by the independent advisory group, a 4-member team that looked through all of the evidence that they had available and also interviewed the women and also sat down with Bill Hybels again. After all of that investigation, they came to the anticlimactic conclusion that the accusations are credible, which doesn't say very much at all. So again, you don't have an explanation in the report of what their process was. They vaguely say that they sat down and went over all of the public information from newspaper clips, interviews, different bits and pieces that were in the media and the press and that the public had access to, and they sat down and gathered all that up and went through that. And then they also had access to the actual women who accused Bill Hybels of some form of inappropriateness. And then they were able to sit down with Bill Hybels and ask him questions. But here's the problem with their conclusion. They don't say anything about how their process of interviewing the women went, and they don't say anything about the process of how they interviewed Bill Hybels. They don't give any of the questions that they asked the women. They don't ask and give any of the questions that they asked Bill Hybels. So we don't know what they asked, and we don't know what lines of thought that they followed and what their trajectory was with the accusers and the accused. All we know is that they did sit down with the accusers and they sat down with Bill Hybels separately and they interviewed them. We don't have access to any of that information. We don't have access to any of the thought process that went behind their anticlimactic conclusion, which was simply that the accusers were credible. Now, some people criticize me by saying that, well, when you conclude that the accusers were credible, you're basically saying that that is true. The accusations are true. And I came back and I said, no, not necessarily. It's possible to have a credible accusation that turns out to be false. Credible accusation means that the accusation is believable, that it passes the bogus test. In other words, when you hear of some accuser leveling something against accused, and right off the bat, right off the surface, prima facie, it sounds fishy, like the Jussie Smollett case. When he spun his story about being attacked by 2 people who were shouting that this is MAGA country and racial and homophobic slurs against him, That whole story sounded fake. It didn't sound credible from the beginning. Now, the accusations against Bill Hybels, because they are credible, doesn't mean they are true. They sound plausible. They sound like they could have happened. They sound like there's something that is possible in the real world. And so you need to take them seriously and you need to investigate them. So when the report says that the accusations are credible, it doesn't say really much of anything. That was my whole point in making that statement, that the statement that the accusations are credible doesn't make sense and doesn't say anything, simply means that it's too vague, it's too general, it's too much of a summary. And I maintain that today. Now, what they could have done was they could have put a lot of detailed information about the process by which they came to that conclusion. They could have said, okay, here are the facts, and they could have laid out all of the facts, and then they could have supported the facts with why they believe that these are hardcore facts based on interviews of women, based on the evidence that they have been able to gather. We don't know how much work was done in pulling together evidence. We don't know if there was any new evidence that they uncovered, because again, they did not tell us. And so this is what's so frustrating about this report. Now, they do mention at the beginning of the report that they said, well, this is not a legal procedure. We don't have subpoena power. We can't force witnesses to speak. And they said that we're also operating under a different standard of judgment. We are operating under the standard not of beyond a reasonable doubt, but simply by the standard of the preponderance of evidence. So they're saying that we are not going to be operating under the standard courtroom procedure, which is evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, which is very fair and which assures that you don't, in the courtroom situation, you don't throw a guilty person in jail. Because if you have evidence beyond reasonable doubt, then you're pretty much assured that the person that you're saying is guilty is actually guilty. Or you're saying that the person who is innocent is probably innocent, because if it's beyond a reasonable doubt, then you have this certainty. They chose to not go that route. They chose to go a lesser degree of certainty. They chose simply a preponderance of evidence. Now, what does that mean, preponderance of evidence? It simply means in this four-member panel, it simply means that they got together and they basically asked each other, well, based on all the evidence that you've seen, what do you think happened? And what do you think is true? And it's basically a preponderance of the evidence can simply be a feeling one way or another. And all four of them, or maybe three out of the four, felt that they had more evidence against Bill Hybels than for Bill Hybels. So it's such a lower standard than in the court of law, which raises a lot of questions. I think one of the questions that needs to be asked is, why would you choose a lower standard of judgment in this case? This is a high-profile case. This got a lot of media attention. You want to make sure that you're not accusing an innocent man, especially because the man is claiming that he is innocent, and he's claiming and he's denying all of these charges. So why would you go with a lesser judgment standard? Why not hold to the higher courtroom standard, beyond reasonable doubt? Why would you settle for something less than beyond reasonable doubt? Why would you lower the standards in this instance when it seems like you would want to make sure that you got this right? I think a lot of people want to get this right. A lot of people around the country, thousands of people, perhaps even millions of people around the world want to make sure that they understand that justice was done here and that a guilty man was charged to be guilty. Now, of course, there's not any legal result of this. Bill Hybels is not going to jail. He's not going to have to pay a fine, or he's not having to suffer any legal consequences. But he has suffered the total destruction of his reputation. His name now is zero. His reputation is zero. He's going to be having a hard time writing a book and finding a publisher to publish it. He's going to have a hard time getting a job in any capacity in ministry. So this has totally ruined his reputation. His entire livelihood is over, and it's great. He suffered great humiliation, and it has basically smeared his name in an irreparable manner. So while he hasn't had to suffer any financial fines or have to go to jail or anything like that, this is a serious matter. So why not have the standard of judgment beyond all reasonable doubt? Why go for the lower preponderance of evidence judgment standard? It doesn't make sense. Now, we needed the team, this 4-member panel, who are not professional investigators and who don't make a living doing this, but they volunteered to step in and try to help the church. But why not explain then why you went with that preponderance of evidence and not the higher, more typical, normal standard for getting to the truth? And they didn't, or they didn't go into detail. They didn't explain, like I said before, the process by which they arrived at their conclusions. They didn't start from the facts, and they didn't, for example, announce that we uncovered new information, new facts, and these were very important in our conclusion. And here are the new facts, here are the new information that we factored into our conclusion. And so start from those facts, explain how you arrived at those facts, got those facts, how did you obtain those facts, where did they come from, explain that you examine those facts and evidences, and that walk us through from those facts all the way to a conclusion, incorporating in the other information that was already publicly available. They didn't do that. So in other words, you have a report that's basically saying, just believe us, and we did a great job of looking at everything, and we reviewed everything, and this is what we just feel is the truth. That's what basically they're saying to the Christian world. Trust us in our judgment that we know what we're talking about, and trust us, Bill Hybels is guilty. But even again, their conclusion is overly vague and overly general and nonspecific. They say that the accusations against Bill Hybels are credible. All of them? What do you mean? Just as a group, just everything that was ever said against Bill Hybels in the media by anyone accusing him of anything, that's all true. Is that what they were saying? I can't believe that they would be saying that. Because, like I said in the last video, we already have someone who recanted of what they originally said. We have some rumor and some gossip of a woman allegedly saying that she had a years-long affair with Bill Hybels, but then she recanted. She said that was a lie. I was trying to get back with him. He hurt me, or I was hurt or offended by him, and so I wanted to get back with him, and that's why I made that accusation. And yet that accusation continues to be used as evidence against Bill Hybels. I don't understand why the news media continue to repeat an accusation that was recanted of by the person that made it. I guess the argument there by the news media outlets is that, well, this woman made an accusation, but she was somehow influenced, or she didn't want to garner publicity, or she wanted to remain in the background, and so she recanted, but she actually did experience this sexual abuse or sexual inappropriateness, but now she's trying to deny it just to get out of having to go through any kind of process of being a witness, having her name exposed, and talking and having it affect her life. So, like, I guess the news media and a lot of people at Willow Creek, the former leaders and elders, they're saying, well, maybe this woman really was telling the truth, but she's just recanting for other reasons. So that's why maybe her name, this woman's name keeps coming, not her name, but her accusation keeps coming up and up and up, even though it was recanted. So I guess in the Me Too movement today, an accuser cannot falsely accuse somebody of something and then say, no, I was mad and I was telling a lie. They can't change their mind. They can't take back their accusation, because I guess in the Me Too movement, every accusation is believed, even if it is a lie. I mean, that's kind of the assumption today. And if somebody does take back their accusation, well, there's something behind it. They're being pressured or intimidated, or there's some motivation why they're now denying the accusation. And so in the Me Too movement today, there's so much pressure to believe every woman's accusation that they don't even believe a woman when she changes her accusation. So it's a crazy time. I think, unfortunately, we're going to see a lot of people get caught up in the Me Too movement and in the sort of vortex of social ideas and trends. And this Me Too movement is definitely a trend. It's a new fashionable thing to do if you're a woman, to come out with some kind of story so that you can be a survivor of some offense or abuse. Another thing that was shocking in the Willow Creek Independent Advisory Group's report is a lot of talk about Bill Hybels treating people disrespectfully, or intimidating people, or bullying people, or this kind of stuff. This is really a shock. Why was that in the report? I thought the issue was whether these women were accusing Hybels of this misconduct, and that was the investigation. And all of a sudden in the report, you have probably as much information or more about Bill Hybels' rude behavior than anything related specifically to these sexual allegations. And this is a sign for me that the group actually didn't have a whole lot of evidence to pin on Bill Hybels. There wasn't a whole lot of incriminating evidence against Bill Hybels other than the accusations of the women that are already public. And so they have to bring in this extra issue of Bill Hybels' personality. You know, he was harsh to people. He would sometimes make people belittle people or whatnot. You know, if you go to any large organization and you talk to people who have worked with CEOs and managers and leaders of groups, certainly if you go to the military and you interview subordinates of commanders and leaders in the military, you're going to get the criticism, well, this person, my commander, belittled me, or my commander intimidated me. My drill sergeant intimidated me when I was in basic training or whatever. You're going to get a lot of people griping about the higher ups. That's part of organizational life. We just have to accept that. So for this report to go into Bill Hybels' personal style of leadership and criticize that isn't what the investigation was all about. But again, there was this fishing expedition, and this is what happens in all kinds of investigations. And this is what we see in politics all the time. Congress opens an investigation on someone. Okay, they have a very specific goal. Did this person, for example, in this case of Donald Trump, did Donald Trump collude with Russia to win the 2016 election? That was the whole investigation, the Mueller investigation. Okay, now what happens once there's an investigation opened up? Then they start a fishing expedition. And any problem, anything about anyone, Trump or related associates, then that becomes fair game. So you can go talk about Trump's business practices. Then you can talk about Trump's personal life. Then you can investigate this, investigate that. So the investigation opens for a very specific reason, and then all of a sudden it becomes this general fishing expedition for anything they can find. Well, that's sort of the way this independent advisory group, the conclusions were. You start reading along and you go, okay, what we're really interested in is there hardcore evidence that Bill Hybels committed sexual misconduct and related to that. But then you start getting into all of this. Wow, we received testimonies of Bill Hybels being pushy, being assertive, being pressuring subordinates, belittling that, all this stuff. Wait a minute, that's not what this report's about. Bill Hybels' leadership management style is not what was being investigated. So when you have to fill the report with stuff like that, that means you don't have a whole lot of hardcore facts that would buttress these accusations. And so you start talking about other things so that you can fill in. The most lame part of the whole report was when the group said that there was enough evidence taking into consideration all these things, including Bill Hybels' leadership style, that would warrant the church to dismiss him even if he hadn't left voluntarily beforehand. So in other words, they were vague in their conclusions, but the way they got around that, the justification for that vagueness, was that, well, we just uncovered enough stuff that would conclude that the church would have had to let him go anyway. So it was okay that he left. That doesn't answer the question. That doesn't either condemn or clear his name. They acted like their goal was just to simply say, well, was the church justified in basically forcing him to leave, or was he right in leaving? And the report said, well, there were all this stuff there. Yeah, the church probably would have been justified to have asked him to leave or required him to leave, even if he hadn't have. Well, that's not what the report was about. The report was about whether these accusations were true. And what the conclusion that this group came to was very misleading. I actually saw Chicago television report on the conclusions of the group, and it said that the accusations against Bill Hybels, the report says, are true. That's what the reporter told the audience of thousands, perhaps millions of viewers, that the AIG, the IAG, Independent Advisory Group's conclusion was that the accusations against Bill Hybels were true. That's what he reported based on the report. Well, that is false. The report does not say that the accusations against Bill Hybels are true. It says that they're credible. See, again, that's the confusion that was sown into the evangelical world by this report. So I have to say that this was a very disorganized, and I don't know what the group was thinking, but what needs to happen if this is supposed to be in any way conclusive is they need to open up and share their thinking process, how they arrived at their conclusion. They need to show their evidence, especially any new evidence, because this was such a high-profile scandal. It needs to be dealt with not just on a summary basis. Well, we think he's credibly accused. No, that's not enough. There needs to be facts shown, evidence shown, and the world needs to know whether Bill Hybels is guilty or whether he's innocent. Now, again, like I said before at the beginning of the program, I don't know if he's guilty. I don't know if he's innocent. I just don't know. I don't know enough about this situation, and it looks like this 4-panel team that was supposed to investigate, it looks like they don't know either. And the only thing they can do is just say, well, there's enough smoke here. There's probably some fire somewhere. Well, that's not good enough, because perhaps there is some fire. There is smoke, definitely. Everybody acknowledges that there's smoke. And the maxim, where there's smoke, there's fire, would lead a credible person to believe, well, there's something there, but we really want to know what. Was he? We probably imagine that there were times when he did maybe talk in a vulgar manner. That seems believable. There were probably times when maybe he flirted with women. There were times when he might have crossed the line. Again, it's hard to know unless you get the facts. But as far as these major accusations, that is something that really needs to be cleared. He is steadfastly denying this, and he is a fairly credible witness. His entire career is built on trust and credibility. And so you're talking about a minister, a widely respected minister, who says that he didn't do those worst and most egregious accusations against him. So you have to weigh that in. And you have to look at the accuser, of the worst and most egregious accusation. What is her credibility? And should we believe her? And can we believe her? Or does she suffer from some psychological or mental illness? Or is there a pattern in her life where she's done something like this before? Again, these are questions that need to be answered so that the world knows for sure whether this man is being accused of something that he did, in which he needs to repent and own up to it. But if he's not, he needs to be cleared and his name cleared.